So, hello. All right, I'll call the meeting to order. It's 10 o'clock now. Rosie, could we have roll call, please?
Yes, Chair Thompson. Sorry, not Thompson, McCarthy. Chair
I am here.
Patrice Horstman, she has notified us that she will be a little bit late to the meeting today.
Okay.
Geronimo Vasquez is going to be our replacement for Supervisor Archuleta, but he is not present today. Austin Aslan.
Here.
Steve Peru.
Present.
Regina Salas.
Present.
Jesse Thompson.
Here.
Judy Begay is not present. It's our alternate. And Becky Daggett. Metro Plan staff, Milebeck.
Here.
And David Wessel.
Here, good morning.
And me, Rosie Ware, I'm here. We also have a few guests today. We have Naomi Yazzie, Cheryl Barlow, and James, Josh Mayer, and Gabio, and Ed Stillings. Did I miss anyone?
Looks good.
Chair McCarthy, that concludes the roll call.
All right, thank you. Before we move on, Jeff, do we usually leave our cameras on or off? Or I know like at city council meetings, we usually leave them off unless we're talking. What's our custom? I kind of forget.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, we haven't established any direction on that. If
So
people have bandwidth problems, sometimes they turn it off and it comes and goes. So unless the board has a preference, we've been flexible.
All right, so we'll leave it up to everybody. Do we have any public comment today? Rosie, do we have any public comment?
Chair McCarthy, no one has emailed ahead of time for public comment, and I don't think anyone in the meeting today has public comment either.
All right, thank you. So item D is approval of minutes. Now, before we get to that, I'll just note that Rosie, you sent out a revised version yesterday, and I believe there were just some very minor changes, like saying, for instance, that there was no public comment and things like that. So does anyone have any questions about the minutes? If not, could I get a motion to approve the minutes as written, as sent out yesterday?
Mr. Chair, this is Steve. I'll make the motion.
Steve, in a second. Well, I'll go ahead and second that. So any further discussion? So all those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
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 And if
Did you guys,
any noes, please say nay or no.
I was a yes. Were you able to hear that?
I hear it now.
Well, I was pressing the space bar and it wasn't working. Still figuring Zoom out.
Okay, and we don't have any noes. So without dissent, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Let's see. We don't have anything on the consent agenda this month. So the next thing is Roman numeral 3, item A, financial report. Mr. Malbec, do you have some comments on this?
I do, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We usually provide a quarterly budget report more often if needed or requested. And the point is to keep you apprised of our overall fiscal health. And most of you I know are familiar with much more complex budgets. I actually cut my teeth as a budget and management analyst 30 years ago for Coconino County. Steve Prue was on the interview panel, as I recall. And so I love budgets, and I am providing what I think you need to see and want to know. Of course, what you think you need to see and want to know is more important. So as I go through this, please let me know if there's something you want to see modified for our presentation next quarter. I'm going to move to page 12 of your packet. And although the staff report spells out a few things, sometimes numbers and graphs are easier for people to follow. And from a revenue perspective, I want to point out that we're well below estimates. And we end the year being at about 60% of our revenue budget. And this would be alarming to be only 60% of a revenue budget, except when you realize that we are a reimbursement program and we only receive back what we spend, and we're underspending as well. And I'm going to tell you why we're underspending. First of all, salary is tracking to budget. We're just slightly underspent there because we've enjoyed a stable employee base and we've had no turnover of our 3 employees. Operating expenses, rent, utility supplies, they're also tracking to budget very well. The issue is capital projects. More than half of our budget is spent on projects. And for a number of reasons, many of the projects have not advanced at the pace I thought they would a year ago. And there are some examples of why on page 11. And I'm going to scroll up to that so you can see it. With our capital projects, we are on track with data management, our mini grant project for bicycle and pedestrian funding, and then pass through funding to Mountain Line. However, some of our other major projects are behind schedule. So the regional transportation plan, that contract was delayed to make time for formation of an advisory group and to refine the scope of work. And at this time, we anticipate spending $40,000 this year of the $150,000 budget. And I want to say that's all fine. We're not behind schedule with this project. The group is performing well, and I'll give a bigger update on the regional transportation plan later in this meeting. Also, we looked at doing a concept design of the Milton Railroad underpass, and that is really on hold, waiting for additional information on the Rio to Flag project, which is coordinated with the Army Corps of Engineers and the BNSF Railroad. And we're also waiting for the conclusion of the Milton 180 CMP project that Dan Gabbio is going to present on later in this meeting. And then another project is the Lone Tree Traffic Interchange. That one has not been started. Basically, we're still looking for management handles on that one. And if we are going to design and spend money on the Lone Tree Traffic Interchange, need to be reasonably assured that those plans are going to be supported by other agencies and it's not just throwing money away. So we will continue to work on these projects, and the next item on the staff or on the agenda is a budget for fiscal year 22, and I'll explain how we continue to move these projects forward. For now, I just chose to give you the budget report first and let you know where we're at, and then move into the 22 budget. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to answer any questions the board has or respond to any concerns.
Sorry, I was muted. Does anyone have any questions? If not, I'm not seeing any in the chat. So Jeff, you can go on to the 2022 budget if you wish.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, a couple of years ago, we began the habit of adopting a 5-year financial plan. And the idea is that by looking ahead, we can align our resources with needs and stay on track towards our short and medium-term goals. Our immediate task is for fiscal year 22. We need to adopt the budget starting July 1st. And looking ahead, I'm going to offer some predictions. To be clear, today, I'm not asking you to adopt this budget. It's just painting a preliminary picture so that you can make adjustments, we can fine tune, and hopefully you have all the information you need and are comfortable with adoption when I ask you to do so in June. So as we look at the budget for next year, first of all, staffing is projected to stay constant. We don't need additional staff, and I think that's fine. We just do a slight increase for benefit expenses at this point. Operations stay flat. They increase at 2% per year. Travel is essentially flat, much more than we will spend this year, but the anticipation is we'll go back to regular travel patterns next year, and the budget is what we have historically had in this organization. So there really aren't any changes to report for staffing and operations and travel. Projects are the most interesting area, and I'm going to put a PowerPoint presentation up so you can see what some of those projects are. So if you'll bear with me while I change the screen. Okay. All right, I hope you can all see my PowerPoint presentation. Can anyone not?
It looks good here.
All right. So a number of projects that I want to report on. The first is the regional transportation plan. This is a project we'll go into more detail later in this meeting, and I'll bring it back actually every month because this is one of the main pieces of work that we do. We update our regional transportation plan, which is a 25-year plan. We update it every 5 years. So we look at the long-term horizon. This project has benefits to all members because we look at the whole system, all the modes and all the agencies in one comprehensive way. And this is a core function of what metropolitan planning organizations do in any region. So MetroPlan has funding on this project, so we can do this work. We're budgeting $280,000 next year to see it through and hopefully complete the project next year. The next project anticipated for fiscal year 22 is the Milton Underpass. This is a project that we have budgeted in fiscal year 21. It's urgent in a sense that we know something needs to be done with Milton Road and the Rio to Flag and the Downtown Connection Center. And it's multi-agency, so that everybody has some interest in this project. And there's also a funding need. And last year when we looked at this, it wasn't clear who was going to take the design of this bridge to the next level. So MetroPlan was in a position to take this one on and had some funding, so we have budgeted it this fiscal year. And the anticipation as things come into focus, we'll work on this project next year. Next is West Route 66, again approved for fiscal year 21. We're looking at carrying this forward to fiscal year 22. It's about a $100,000 project. And then mini grant. So MetroPlan has a mini grant. It's a competitive process where we fund projects of a local agency. This year we're budgeting 222. I'm suggesting $250,000 of a grant that we can put to one of our member agencies' projects. As a reminder, this fiscal year, the grant went to the city for a bicycle and pedestrian project. And then there's also a Mountain Line pass-through grant. This is administrative in nature. It's basically money that we carry on our books, but we pass it through, and it's for a Mountain Line project. There's not a lot of involvement for MetroPlan on this one. And then last but not least is the Lone Tree traffic interchange. This is a very long-term horizon. It's multi-agency, and there is a funding opportunity of leveraging Propositions 419 and 420 with some additional money. And as we've looked at this, there is no other agency who has staff assigned for this project. So it feels like a natural, and we continue to look at how we can find some handles on this and do something about a Lone Tree traffic interchange. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the kind of the big picture of our budget for next year. I do just want to point out that in years past, the city of Flagstaff, when they hosted MetroPlan, would budget a $500,000 contingency every year. And that was partly because they have expenditure limitation issues with their budget, and it was easier just to put it in on the front end. I'm recommending we don't do that this year. If we are successful at getting an additional grant, we can always just bring it back to this board and say, we got a grant for X amount and we'd like to adjust our budget. And at this point, I would, I'm looking to answer any questions you have, and then to be prepared to come back with this budget in either May or June to ask for adoption as we continue to modify it. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Melbeck. I'll make a quick comment about the railroad bridge over Milton. And boy, there's a lot of variables on that. I think BNSF would like to have 3 tracks instead of the current 2. There's probably going to be a move to make that 6 lanes underneath instead of 4. The other thing is to build the bridge for the Rio de Flag under the railroad track, we may have to put a temporary track in and then build more. So there's a lot of variables on that one. So that one is kind of nebulous right now. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Mr. Melbeck or for the board? Jeff, my screen is just completely black. I think you need to take your slideshow down. There we go. Something happened better there. All right, I'm not seeing any questions or comments. So why don't we move on to the next item, which is also yours, Jeff. That's the MetroPlan, the Mountain Line IGA.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to put the board packet back up on the screen.
Yeah, it's page 21 for anyone that's kind of following along on their computer.
For some reason, I keep going to a fully black screen and I'm not sure why. If you'd please just bear with me for a second here.
These computers are pure magic.
Okay, I believe you can all see the board packet again up on your screen.
We can.
All right, so the Mountain Line IGA amendment. Yes. Okay, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, this is an action item, and I'm asking you to approve an amendment to an intergovernmental agreement with Mountain Line. And by way of background, MetroPlan already has an intergovernmental agreement with Mountain Line, and we want to fine tune it. So we are organizations that have a lot in common, and the first part of the staff report spells out what some of those commonalities are in terms of representing a number of different organizations, being with local government, reporting to a board of directors, receiving and managing significant federal funding. And we're also both relatively new and small organizations, MetroPlan, very small compared to the city, county, ADOT, and NAU. And when we adopted the first IGA, we got clear on how we would share funding and the services we would each provide. And I can go into as much detail as you like. The summary is that MetroPlan does some of the public process work, public outreach. Mountain Line manages funds for people who are elderly and disabled. And Mountain Line also provides personnel services to MetroPlan, human resources and payroll. All these things stay the same. Really, the amendment just makes clear on how various pots of federal transit money will be managed. Some is competitive, some is formula, and we got clear with Mountain Line on how those will be managed. We are clarifying MetroPlan's responsibility to meet the needs of non-English speaking individuals in the public outreach effort that we do. And this also allows Mountain Line to help us with procurement when we have small procurements to do. They've got a good procurement team and it just saves us time and is more efficient. And finally, it clarifies how $283,000 can be billed to Mountain Line by MetroPlan. And there's some history on that one. And if anybody wants more information, please let me know. And overall, the IGA is something that the CEO of Mountain Line has already signed, and we have no objections from the TAC or the management committee on approving it. And I'm asking the board to approve it today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments from the board?
Mr. Chair, if I could, this is Steve.
Yes, Mr. Peru.
As Jeff said, the Mountain Line board has looked at it. And I just want to make a comment, of course, an observation relative regarding the coordination between MetroPlan and Mountain Line. Of course, it's crucially important that we have a great relationship with MetroPlan because of the similar work that we do. And so again, I think that the partnership that has been established with Jeff and Heather and the teams has been very good. And to continue to build on that going forward is important. And the IGA, of course, provides some clarity in some areas that at some point in time we would need to clarify anyway. And so being proactive and identifying those areas now and creating a shared understanding and memorializing all this into the IGA, I think will really help going forward. So just a comment and gratitude for that. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? Well, Mr. Peru, would you be willing to make a motion to approve the amendment as presented in the packet?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do make the motion that we approve the IGA as presented by staff. Thank you.
Could we get a second?
Chairman, I'll
Yeah.
second that. This is Supervisor Thompson as you move forward with this.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you, and I'm an aye also. Do we have any negatives, any noes? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So the next item is item D, and that's adoption of the coordinated plan. I guess, Mr. Wessel, you're going to make a presentation on this discussion?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board.
Thank you, Dave.
David Wessel, Transportation Planning Manager. Today, we're going to present to you the coordinated public transportation human services plan, also shorthand coordinated plan for your consideration, and we're recommending to you that we adopt this plan today. The coordinated plan sets goals for the elderly and disabled program for 5310. We're looking to coordinate human service agencies like Hazoni, Guidance Center, DES, and others with public transportation. So I'm going to bring up to on screen a presentation. We'll walk through the plan and some amendments that have come through the TAC and Management Committee. So can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. So the coordinated plan, as I was saying, provides a framework among transportation services. It meets our federal requirements and really at its heart identifies these gaps in services that provide mobility for the elderly and disabled. And so within the plan, we identify strategies and priorities. This year is a minor update. We do a major update every 4 years. And as such, we're really just updating primarily the demographics and the projects in the plan. And I'll talk about the projects here in a moment. There are several types of gaps that we've identified in the plan: information, temporal, spatial, infrastructure, and human capital. And the plan speaks to all of these. Information, the ideal is to make people aware of all the options that they have and to increase our education opportunities and resources for users. In terms of temporal gaps, this is really addressing those hours of operation and making sure that there's convenient hours of operation for users, and to look at expanding those options to close those gaps, especially when fixed route service is not operating. Spatially, there are areas that are not being served right now by transit service and are difficult to serve. And so really looking at trying to expand those and get full coverage for the region eventually by expanding those options and partnerships. And I want to bring attention to an effort that's ongoing with Mountain Line, and really give credit to Stella Hollander, the project manager on this. This is a micro transit project in the Huntington industrial area where there is no fixed route services. There are many human service organizations. There's the Flagstaff Shelter, the Food Bank, and others down there. And this is really working with a grant to do a pilot project in that area to increase, I'll just call it dial-a-ride service, that would make it much more convenient for people to access that area, as well as areas and services in the immediate surrounding area. Infrastructure gaps really focus on the pedestrian and bicycle access to transit services and destinations to make sure that the connectivity is there. And then human capital, looking at making sure that the staffing and the resources are available. I'm not going to read through all of these, but you can see the priorities set in the plan. And really, maintenance of the current programs is the first priority. The second is to improve those, and the third is then to expand into other areas. I'll pause just briefly, let you kind of scan through that. So the plan is really the foundation for grants out of the Federal Transit Administration 5310 program. And the 5310 program is administered by ADOT, and they distribute funds to regional organizations across the state, which then go through a process such as this to distribute funds to eligible agencies. And in order to be eligible, agencies need to participate in the Coordinated Mobility Council. This is a council that Mountain Line and Metro Plan run together, and the council approved this plan, recommended approval on the 19th of this month. And those organizations then put together a list of projects for which they intend to apply. And those then make them eligible within the plan. And I'm going to run through those quickly just so you can get a flavor of what's in there. The funds for which they're competing are these small urban funds. And you can see there's $1.2 million available across the state. It's a relatively small amount. And you can use those for capital, you can use them for operating. And operating is limited to just under $500,000. There is some COVID relief of about $200,000 available this year. So we have several organizations that routinely apply for these funds and participate in the Coordinated Mobility Council. The Civic Service Institute and NAU operates their Senior Companion Program. This year, they're applying for some operating funds. Mountain Line has several projects. The taxi program, their ADA Plus, which just allows them to extend beyond the mandatory 3/4 mile. Bus stop mobility, so that's that capital improving pedestrian and bicycle access to their stops. And then this year is something a bit unique, and that's to improve the accessibility for elderly and disabled to their website, making sure that the website has that universal design. Another group is Quality Connections. They're looking to apply for vehicles, 2 vehicles, and they're and those across the state, I would say, for capital, that vehicle expansion or replacement is pretty typical. You see that happening with Coconino County and Hazonie as well. When we look at this year 1 summary, and I guess I should say that this is a 2-year grant cycle, so you apply for 2 years at a time. You can see that just in our region, we're looking at almost $750,000 out of that $1.2 million funds available. So you can see that we're not going to receive all of these funds, but we will apply. And what happens is after the awards are made, and you saw like Hazonie applied for 4 vehicles, they're likely to get 1, for instance. And the ask for the taxi program may be cut in half in terms of what was actually asked versus what's awarded. And then halfway through that first year, ADOT will come back and start engaging with these different agencies and look at whether their year 1 projects that weren't awarded are still in need, or if there's something in year 2 that can be looked at. So you can see the list here is a bit shorter, same entities, many of the same types of activities, and about $440,000 worth of applications. So the TAC and the management committee looked at this and are both supportive, but there were some changes that came about. Fiber optics is very important. We're seeing it, such as the meeting we're on today, growing importance in our daily lives and the needs of people. So we added, based on that input from primarily the management committee, some specific language relative to fiber and fiber optic communications. And that last line down there, computer-aided dispatch, which is an element that is eligible under other grants, but is also really dependent on strong communications. And then the last amendment, Hazonie did modify one of its application requests, and so that's been changed. So that's the presentation. Again, we are looking for approval of or adoption of the plan today, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. Mr.
Thank you,
Chair.
Dave. I appreciate that. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Hey, Chairman,
Mr. Thompson?
hello, Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Thompson, go ahead.
Hey, David, is that the Hojone? Hey, David, is that Hojone program? Is that with NACA, Native Americans for Community Action?
I don't know, Mr. Thompson, Mr. Chair, Mr. Thompson. I don't know. I can look into that. My first instinct is to say I don't believe they're associated, but I'll check on that for you.
Okay, thank you, because I'd like to know a little bit more about it.
So David, maybe you can send an email out if you can find something out about that. Do we have any other comments or questions? I don't see any. So it'd be nice to get a motion to approve to adopt the 2021 Human Services Transportation Plan update. Is anybody willing to do that?
Mr. Chair, this is Council Member Salas.
Yes.
Yeah, I move to adopt the recommended adoption. I move to adopt the 2021 Metro Plan Mountain Line Coordinated Public Transit Human Services Transportation Plan update as presented.
Thank you, Councilmember Salas. Do we have a second?
Chairman, I will go ahead and make a second to that motion.
Yes, Mr. Thompson seconds. Do we have any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. Do we have any nays? Hearing none, the motion passes with unanimously. All right, now we're moving on to the strategic advance. Mr. Melbeck is going to talk about what date we might have it. We had previous discussion on this, but we're going to kind of update that discussion. And Jeff, maybe you could just give a very brief overview of what is a strategic advance for the new people.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. The strategic advance is a way for us to look ahead and what kind of organization we want to be and exactly how we accomplish what we want to each year. We have a rolling 18-month strategic work plan. Typically, we get together every January. We look at the success we've had in the year past, and we determine where we want to go, and then we figure out specifically how we get there. We did not have the strategic advance this year in January because of all the change we've had with the board. And on February 3rd, just last month, the first meeting where we had all of our new board members together, the board discussed the need for the advance and either having a balance between give new board members time to understand the organization and also how do we keep momentum going and move things forward. And ultimately the board said, Jeff, go figure out if we can do it on May 5th or June 2nd. And we looked at that, and May 5th does not work. There's a conflict with one of our member agencies that prohibits them attending. And June 2nd, I will say, it just feels too far away from a management perspective. We need to put together our budget, our unified planning work program. We want to identify which projects we're going to start to pursue for funding. And although it is a bit rushed, it's not ideal to push this in on April 7th. I feel like all things considered, that would be our best move forward. And that's what I'm recommending we do. And I'm asking for your support today. We would still do this as a Zoom meeting. I'm asking the board to add an extra hour. So April 7th is the date that is already on your calendars because it's the first Wednesday of the month, and we have a board meeting already scheduled from 10 to 12. I'm asking to add an extra hour so we can go until 1 o'clock on the strategic advance and get the work done that we need to. We have run this past the TAC and the management committee, and Rosie sent out emails in coordination with our member agencies. And it seems like we will have critical mass to do it. And really the options are to go ahead and approve by April 7th. And if you really prefer and you want to do it June 2nd, we can do that. It just has some costs in terms of moving some of our budgeting and our planning documents forward for our member agencies. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll just briefly mention that I have talked to Patrice Horstman about this and that she is good with April 7th. Another thought I have is we may want, and this kind of ties into the next agenda item, but at some point we may want to have more detailed discussions about what's going on Milton. So I don't know if that would be added to that agenda or if we need to resolve that issue before that, but just something to keep in mind. So as I mentioned to you before, Jeff, I'm a little concerned that we can't finish this in 3 hours, but you're thinking that we probably can. So it might spill over another half hour or so, but whatever. So I would be interested in comments. We don't have anything formal on this, but I'd be interested in the other board members if they can live with April 7th, or if that doesn't work, or any other comments related to this. Any comments? Now, if you don't say anything, I think we're going to assume that it's okay. April 7th.
April 7th.
April 7th.
Okay. Jeff, it sounds like we have critical mass for April 7th. So thank you. And I think that does make a lot of sense.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
The next item is item F, and this is Milton Corridor update, what the ADOT is working on, and possibly maybe some comments on 180 if that ties into this also. So Mr. Malbec, please go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, this is a very important project. Obviously, it's important to the community. I'm pleased to introduce Dan Gabbio, who is with ADOT and is the project manager. And he's going to give an update on the status of where this planning project is at for Milton Corridor and 180 Corridor Master Plan. So there is a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to try to run the slides for Dan. And Dan, do you want me to put that up now?
Sure, that would be great, Jeff. And thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Jeff. And good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Again, my name is Dan Gabbio. I'm the ADOT project manager for the Milton Road and US 180 Corridor Master Plans. And I have a brief presentation to provide an update on the status of the Corridor Master Plans for you here today. And with that, please feel free to interrupt me at any time with any questions, but I will pause a few times throughout at some key points here to get some questions and comments going. Thank you, Jeff. Next slide. This is the US 180 corridor, which we're evaluating as part of the master plan. It starts at the intersection of Route 66 and Humphrey Street, just southeast of the council chambers there in Flagstaff. And it goes all the way to the north past Snowball Road to milepost 233, which is the Crowley Pit former snowplay area. Next slide, please. For Milton Road, it covers the entire Milton corridor, which also extends into a portion of Route 66. So it starts to the south at Forest Meadows, which is the first signal after you get in town off of I-17. And it goes north all the way to the green line there, which is Humphrey Street, and slightly beyond to Beaver Street, just to ensure we're analyzing all impacts. Next, please. Here's a schedule of where we've come from and where we are today. So we started the corridor master plans back in the fall of 2017. So we're already, well, 3 years into this analysis. And throughout that process, we've gone through 3 rounds of alternatives analysis to help us refine the alternatives we were evaluating. During that process, we did have 2 formal opportunities for the public to provide input. First opportunity was the summer of 2018. And then most recently, this past fall and winter, we had a second round of public meetings virtually due to COVID. And in between there, we had some satellite meetings and online survey opportunities to get some targeted impact and input from the public. So with that, in late January, we have arrived at the point where we've selected our recommended alternatives for each of the corridor master plans. And with that, I'll get into those details in just a moment. But we still have some more work to do. We intend to refine those recommended alternatives, which is what we're working on now. We had a meeting with our project partners last month in February to start that process, and we are hoping to finalize that in our meeting later this month so that we could come to an agreement on what specifically the details are or what spot improvements we want to include for those recommended alternatives. Then finally, this summer, we're hoping to wrap up and conclude the corridor master plans with the final output being a final report, which details what the recommended alternatives look like, where the spot improvements are. There will be some conceptual engineering to flesh that out, and it'll help to establish and detail what the vision for the corridor looks like. And I will note, just you can see here on the bottom of the screen, this is a collaborative process, has been from the get-go. And each month we meet with our project partners as shown below. So in addition to ADOT, we have MetroPlan, of course, Mountain Line, the county, Forest Service, Federal Highway Administration, NAU, BNSF. I think I captured everyone there. But at any rate, we're coordinating with all of our partners within the region that have land managing authority or regional authority of some sorts. Anyone who could be impacted by this has been participating to date. Thanks, Jeff. Next slide, please. So these were the original objectives that our partners agreed to as far as what we want to achieve from these corridor master plans. So we want to address congestion and safety. And for US 180, we have a special emphasis on addressing winter congestion. We want to identify a long-term 20-year vision for the corridors. We want to obtain public and stakeholder input on alternatives, including multimodal alternatives, scope out and further implement previous and new strategies consistent with the long-term vision, prioritize implementation projects for design, assist Mountain Line in completing its bus rapid transit or BRT project, which they have funding to do. And throughout this process, we're following the Planning Environmental Linkages Process, or PEL, which is an FHWA initiative to help us streamline and carry forward our decisions in this process into the next phase, into design and NEPA. Next slide, please. So for US 180, I'll start with this corridor because it's a little bit more straightforward. I'll go over the alternatives that we reviewed, some of the travel time summary results that we modeled, the public's input on everything that we've analyzed, and then finish up with the recommended alternative that we've selected. Once we go through this, we'll go through the same for Milton Road. Next slide, please. So this is the no build plus for US 180 in a high level view. And this is actually our recommended alternative for US 180. What the no build plus is by no build, we mean we're not going to be intending to add additional lanes on US 180. The plus is we do have quite a substantial amount of spot improvements that we would like to include primarily within existing right-of-way, which would help to benefit all of our multimodal users. So we have various pedestrian improvements, cyclist improvements, transit improvements, and other general safety and operational improvements that we'd like to include. Where we're at in our analysis is everything on the top row under the spot improvements section lists out, generally speaking, what our partners have agreed upon as far as what they would like to see. And below that, where it says other potential spot improvements, these are some additional ideas that we still need to discuss and refine and reach a consensus on. Some of these were things that the public had said from our first round of public input or other stakeholders. Others were just things that we needed to further vet out. Next slide, please. Going through the other alternatives that we analyzed, we have alternative packages A through D, and each of these vary. What we did is we broke down the US 180 corridor by segment. So there's an urban segment to the left-hand side, which starts from Route 66 and goes to Columbus Avenue. That's Humphrey Street. And for this particular alternative, the alternative A, we looked at making some revisions to what Humphrey Street could look like, where we would have a managed lane down the center lane, where it's currently a two-way left turn lane. For the suburban segment, which goes from Columbus Avenue to Peakview Street, under this alternative, we did look at adding additional lanes. So for that concept, you can see there in the bottom of the screen in the middle, we looked at adding an additional lane in each direction, a bike lane, and a wider center turn lane / median. And in the rural segment, which extended from Peakview to Snowball Road, we looked at doing a similar concept. We did, in this alternative, look at adding an additional lane, but we looked at just having a wider shoulder, which could accommodate cyclists under that scenario. And to spare you all the details, we came up with various concepts or twists to each of these segments under alternatives B, C, and D. I'll leave that for you to look at if you'd like more detail, but we can go ahead and skip through to alternative E, if you will, Jeff. So alternatives E and F were bypass alternatives. We started with 4 bypass alternatives that we looked at. We eliminated 2 based on public input from a couple of years ago, but we did further analyze these. We modeled them and evaluated them, and we found that we just weren't getting very beneficial traffic operational value from them because of the out of direction travel, the lower speeds associated with these facilities wasn't giving us a huge benefit. There was some minor benefit, but we reached a consensus with our partners that it wasn't noticeable enough benefit that outweigh the costs and impacts of these alternatives. And so we recommended to the public that we did not recommend these 2 alternatives. And when we get into the public feedback, we'll share what they said about that. Next slide, please. So these were the travel time results of the various alternatives. As you could see, for some of the alternatives, like alternative A and the 2 bypass alternatives, which were E and F near the bottom, we did get a slight positive benefit, but from our opinion, it was fairly negligible. We're talking about the difference of less than a minute in some cases here. Yet these alternatives had very, very high costs and impacts associated with them. And then for the other alternatives, B through D, we actually found that we resulted in a negative travel time impact. Next slide, please. And with that, these were the public results. The public very much so supported the No Build Plus, which you can see on the second row in green. It ranked #1 from the public. It was the only alternative which received more public support than opposition. And this is what we recommended to the public. So they supported our recommendations. Next slide, please. And with that, we upheld and reached a consensus from our project partners to keep the No Build Plus as our recommended alternative for US 180. So again, it would not add additional lanes on US 180, but would consider various spot improvements, include various spot improvements for all of our multimodal users, cyclists, pedestrians, bus users. We'll consider a wildlife mitigation and other various safety. And with that, the details that I presented are on our website, and we're still working to refine this No Build Plus, and that'll be included in the draft and final reports later this spring and summer. Before I move on to Milton Road, are there any questions regarding where we're at with the US 180 Corridor Master Plan and with our recommendation?
Mr. Chair.
I have one comment, but let me open it up to the other board members first. Any other comments, questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Steve.
Steve, please go ahead.
So, so the no build option of the no build plus of not adding lanes, and it's an observation. I don't have anything other than just a reaction. It seems counter to what we always hear about 180 and traffic, you know, just in terms of anecdotal responses from people. We need to add a lane, you know, and so it seems a consistent message in that area from individuals that are impacted has been, we need to add a lane, and yet we're not. And I see with the record, it's just kind of counterintuitive in my head to look at this option, know what kind of general themes or comments have been made in the past by citizens and of course people there, and the two don't align. So just an observation. I don't have an answer to it. It's just a response. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if you'd like me to respond briefly, I could before the next.
Yes, Dan, please do.
Thank you. That's a very astute observation, and the general thought behind this recommendation is that through our analysis and public input, we determined that we really couldn't provide better travel time benefits with any of the alternatives that we evaluated. And it comes down to a couple things from my observations. Is one, with the bypass alternatives, again, they were too far out of direction and lower speed facilities. So it ultimately didn't generate much of a benefit compared to the substantial cost to those environmentally sensitive corridors. Along US 180 itself, really the downstream bottleneck gets back to Milton Road in various intersections, access control along Milton Road and Humphrey Street. And we found through our analysis of Milton Road that I'll get into is that the build alternatives for that corridor would also not generate a strong benefit, which would relieve or provide the opportunity to enhance travel time on US 180. And really we were focusing on the southbound PM Peak direction in particular with that analysis, because that's really when we receive the greatest congestion from winter users on US 180 is on the weekends and the afternoons. That's when you have a substantially larger amount of vehicles traveling on US 180. That's when we get the congestion. And unfortunately, we weren't able to identify some strong benefits on the Milton corridor and the southbound PM Peak, which would help to offer that opportunity to provide more travel time improvements to 180.
Thank you. That makes sense. Appreciate it.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions or comments? I did have a couple thoughts. Did you look at the impact during the very high snow season, you know, Snow Bowl and the other snow play areas out there? I mean, maybe we don't get much advantage on a routine day, but what about during those special times? Was that looked at separately?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So we actually modeled we built our traffic model to accommodate those winter play weekends using those traffic volumes to see if we could make a difference during those times, because that was our emphasis area. We, generally speaking, US 180 operates fairly well on a day-to-day basis, but really it's those weekends, winter weekends, we were trying to target.
Okay, the other thing I might note is that regardless of what we do on Milton, we're going to have another corridor over the next few years that's going to carry a lot of traffic, which we call Lone Tree. And you know, that may help on Milton, but it probably will end up funneling more traffic from Lone Tree up to 180. So anyway, was part of the consideration that it would be very expensive to come up with right of way to put 4 lanes in? Because I realize there's not a lot of land and it's pretty restricted on both sides. Was that part of the consideration?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So in addition to traffic operations, we came up with a collective agreed upon list of evaluation criteria with our project partners. And subsequently, we received input from the public on the criteria and the weighting, particularly for use in Milton Road. Some of those additional criteria we considered were right-of-way impacts, costs, environmental impacts, multimodal benefit, as well as community character, to name the categories, at least, of our criteria.
All right, and then my last question is, I got a lot of phone calls and emails about the Forest Avenue crossing. I understand we're considering some pedestrian improvements along the corridor, but that's the one that I get a lot of emails on. So any idea when we might see some improvements at that intersection?
I can't say when, but I will say that we've also received those similar comments from the public and our stakeholders. And actually, my consultant is going to be meeting with the city on that particular intersection, a couple of others prior to our next meeting, to see if we can come up with some good strategies there to recommend to our project partners that could address the concerns from the public there. So it's definitely on our radar. It's something we'll be discussing and have some content in our master plan to hopefully address that.
Well, thank you, Dan. Do we have any more comments, questions from the board members or from staff? Anybody? Not seeing any. Dan, thank you for making time for us today. We may have some follow-up questions. That wouldn't surprise you, I bet.
Not at all. Jeff, did we still have more time for Milton, or do we need to defer that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, let's do Milton.
Yes, I'll put that back up on the screen.
So soon we forget.
And I'll try to go through this fairly quickly so we can get to the questions. Jeff, about how much time do you think we have here?
You know, if we got a couple pretty weighty items, so it'd be nice if we could be wrapped up with this item by 11:30, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I think we can do that, or maybe better.
Thank you for that, Jeff. So same process I'll walk you through for Milton. So let's go ahead and get into it real quick. Next slide, please, Jeff. So I'll walk you through the alternatives that we have for Milton Road. This is just what's out there today. This is the no build condition. What's missing from this graphic is showing where we have turn lanes, and there's also a continuous northbound right turn lane from the southern end of the corridor up through about Chambers. And generally speaking, we had a no build concept. We had a no build plus concept, similar to what we had reviewed for US 180. And ultimately, what we had recommended is what's called the no build hybrid alternative. The description of that is it would be a hybrid of the no build and no build plus alternatives. It would not add additional lanes on Milton Road. It would better balance traffic operations and multimodal improvements. It would avoid or minimize impacts to property, and it would retain the existing northbound bus/right turn lane that I mentioned. Next slide, please. So in addition, we also analyzed a wide range of alternatives, which narrowed down to a few that we analyzed in detail and received recent public input on. This is System Alternative 5, which would have added an additional lane in each direction. It would also add a bike lane and bike buffer, a 5-foot parkway or landscape buffer, as well as a 10-foot sidewalk. It would have taken 125 feet of right-of-way to achieve this. Also doesn't include the various turn lanes. Next slide, please. This is system alternative 6A, which would, in addition to adding an additional general purpose lane in each direction, it would also add an additional managed lane specifically for bus use, right turn lane users, and cyclists. So all in all, this is an 8-lane facility. It was our widest alternative concept. Behind the curb, we included a 5-foot parkway again, and a 10-foot sidewalk, and it included a 15-foot center turn lane or median. This one would have required 144 feet of right-of-way mid-block, not including turn lanes. Next slide, please. This is alternative 6B. With this alternative, we would be adding a managed lane on the outside, which would be specific to bus users, cyclists, and right turn lane users. This also included an 8-foot parkway or landscape buffer and a 10-foot sidewalk. And in total, it would have required 128 feet of right-of-way, mid-block, minus turn lanes. Next slide, please. And this was the final alternative we looked at in our final analysis, alternative 13. This was a center bus lane concept where we had 2 bus lanes in the center of the facility. Those lanes would be for buses only. We would have maintained the 2 general purpose lanes that we have there today and would have added bike lanes, 10-foot parkways, and 10-foot sidewalks. In all, it would have required 129 feet of right-of-way mid-block, minus turn lanes, and a little bit more at intersections to accommodate the stations. Next slide, please. So again, we ran all these alternatives through our model. And although we did see some benefits in the northbound AM peak period, we received detrimental impacts to travel time in all the other times. So in the AM southbound period and in the northbound peak, the build alternatives actually worsen travel times. And this is a bit challenging to understand. Some of the reasoning behind this is that when you widen lanes, you then have to change the signal timing to accommodate pedestrian crossing and the side streets. But also because of the nature of widening the alternatives, we also felt that there were many spot improvements that we needed to include to enhance the corridor for pedestrians primarily, but as well as cyclists and transit users. And because of some of those spot improvements, it actually created a worsened travel time experience for those directions. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of the results. After completing our final or tier 3 analysis, the no build was second with a total score of 60.26. Again, we used our various criteria: traffic operations, multimodal improvements, environmental impacts, right-of-way impacts, costs, community character, and others. The no-build hybrid, we did not evaluate, but this was a final recommendation after the fact that we're now recommending and analyzing. The no-build plus, which would have cost 9.8 million, ranked 5th. This would have also impacted over 9 properties along Milton Road. Alternative 5, which was the additional lane alternative, would have been over $85 million, would have impacted over 21 properties. That actually was the highest ranked alternative through our analysis, but because of reasons I'll get into, we did not recommend that alternative. Alternative 6A was the 8-lane facility, which included both the general purpose lane and the bus lane, would have been over 95 million, would have impacted over 30 properties, and that was the 3rd ranked alternative. Alternative 6B, the outside bus lane, was over $74 million, would have impacted over 20 properties and ranked 4th. Alternative 13, the center lane bus alternative, would have cost over $77 million, impacted over 20 properties, and was ranked last and 6th. Next slide, please. So this is what the public had to say. So when we asked them specifically, which alternative do you recommend? These were the results on top under that blue column. And alternative 5 was the public's first ranking alternative. It was one of 2 alternatives that got a positive result from the public, and it was alternative 5 was the only one that received at 50% support from the public. All the other alternatives, with the exception of 6B, received more opposition than support from the public. Alternative 6B received slightly more support than opposition, but even then we didn't have greater than 50% support from the public for that alternative. Similarly, we asked the public if they felt that it would make it a great street. This was something that the city and the council wanted us to evaluate, and we had very similar results. Alternative 5, the additional general purpose lane, was ranked 1 by the public, though still didn't get greater than 50% support from the public of being a great street. Alternative 6B and 13 received slightly more support from the public than opposition, but again, less than 50% in total. And as you'll see in the next slide, we get to some conflicting results. So in addition to those questions, we asked them targeted questions about right-of-way impacts, because we wanted to hear from the public not only what they wanted to see, but what they're willing to accept. And with that, these were the results when asking them about right-of-way impacts. And we asked them not only for the alternative, but for various features as well, which is what's depicted here. So we asked them, are they willing to remove properties in order to add a bus lane, in order to add a travel lane, a bike lane, wider sidewalk, or in the landscaped area? And as you can see from the results, the majority of the public said nothing. We're not willing to accept any right-of-way impacts, property impacts to accommodate these features, followed by we're willing to accept a little bit, 1 to 10 properties worth of impacts, and then less as you get into more properties. So as you can see there in red, once we get into the 21 to 30 range, the public was very much not in support of taking that many properties to accommodate these features. And then on the right-hand side, it's the same thing, but from a percentage perspective. So you can see, for example, most of the public felt within the 27 to 40% range of the public responses, they were unwilling to accept any property impacts to accommodate those features, followed by a range from the 23 to 32% range that they would be willing to accept minimal impacts to accommodate those features. Next slide, please. So because of all of the considerations that we had in, again, traffic operations, multimodal improvements, safety, right-of-way impacts, and the public's feedback, we ultimately elected not to recommend the #1 performing alternative, which was alternative 5, from an analysis perspective. We elected to identify a new alternative altogether, which is the no-build hybrid alternative. And again, a recap of that is it would be a hybrid of the no-build and no-build plus. It would not add additional lanes. It would better balance traffic operations and multimodal improvements. It would avoid or minimize impacts to property, which was important to the public. And it retains the existing features such as the northbound right turn lane / bus lane. With that, we are like 180 in the process of refining what this would look like. I'll also add that one thing that we're trying to do with this is identify what this looks like in a phased approach. And by that, in phase 1, we're looking to adhere to this description to the best of our ability and really try to work within the means of within our right-of-way to the best extent possible, and try to stick to that where we wouldn't be impacting properties and parking and things like that. For phase 2, we're looking at developing a specification of what's our long-term vision that we could achieve as part of redevelopment. And with that, we have more flexibility to include some of those features such as wider sidewalks, wider landscape buffers, and other multimodal features. And so right now we're in the middle of trying to define what those specifications look like for both phase 1 and phase 2. We're hoping to wrap that up this spring. With that, I'll take any questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
I guess a similar response to the one I had on 180. I think it's going to be kind of an incredulous response. At the same time, though, I think that the general public, mostly the Flagstaff folks, would know that just given the impact to right of way and properties, they would be like, well, what do you do? I mean, so I think there's going to be more of an awareness that it's going to be hard. It would be hard to do that without impacting businesses, et cetera. But again, I think we're still going to be in a bit of a challenging situation to try to create enough context around the recommendations that it kind of mitigates the reaction. Because again, I mean, just my response is, it's kind of like, you got to be kidding. But, you know, we're here at the table listening to, you know, having the benefit of the data. But I guess it just feels like we need to really work on this as a important educational opportunity with regard to traffic on 180 and Milton. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments.
Do we have any other comments?
Mr. Chair, this is David Wessel. If I can
David,
make a
please
quick
go ahead.
comment. Yeah, so the city staff has been working on zoning issues and code that will look at setbacks and other things that could accommodate a future phase 2 vision, as Dan mentioned. And you know, one of the challenges in the interim is you know, how do we put this 10 pounds of sugar into this 5-pound bag that is Milton Road? And you know, we're working together to, you know, identify priorities amongst, you know, bicycle, pedestrian, landscaping priorities within the existing right of way. And I think we'll get there. But then we also need to talk about how we transition to phase 2 and how that works. I think there is a lot of work on the city's part going forward, both in the zoning realm, but also in infrastructure. Access management is going to be a key point of this to improve safety and traffic flow. Access management affects circulation to businesses. And that's where off-corridor improvements, such as the baggage roads, if you're familiar with the RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan, and maybe new connections can improve that circulation and help access management work better. But those are things that the city's going to need to address kind of off the ADOT jurisdiction. So thank you, and I'll answer any questions if anybody has them.
Thank you, David. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, after the board members all make their points, I would like to say a few things.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Any other board member comments?
I suppose I can react.
Please, Austin.
So, yeah, I mean, this is a hard pill to swallow. I think, you know, thank you, Dan, for the presentation and for all the hard work and the research that went into this. I'm really just here, I guess, to echo what Mr. Peru has had to say so far. My feelings are very similar. I think, you know, my instinct is to push back on this and to try to get a little bit more. But beyond and above my own personal reaction to this, I think we need to be very careful about framing. I think if we go back to the public and we tell them no build, basically what that's going to translate to in their heads is no changes. And that's going to be extremely problematic and will create a lot of pushback. There was pretty significant public investment in this process and input. And I think people are in danger of not feeling heard. I think there's a strong appetite, especially in Flagstaff, for some big changes on Milton and for some new directions on Milton. really highlighting multimodal and some aesthetic improvements as well. And if our message out of the gate is no change plus or no change hybrid, it's gonna hit them in the brain as we've decided not to listen to you and we're not going to do anything. So just at the very baseline, I think that needs to be understood and appreciated for how we move forward in framing this. And I do think there's going to be some pushback and a lot of tension involved in this process from the Flagstaff community. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Austin. More comments?
Mr. Chair?
Regina, please.
Yes, thank you, Dan, and I appreciate the presentation and the expertise. I was just going through my notes. The public process started in the fall of 2018, and that was before the previous council adopted the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. And then, of course, last year, City Council adopted the Climate Emergency Plan. So, so I am guessing in the public meetings that was conducted for this project, the cap, as we know it, was not put into consideration on both plans, the 180 and Milton corridor plans. So I am also concerned about, and I'm wearing the city's hat in embracing complete streets with multimodal transportation and more opportunities for bicycling and walking. Also, I'm not sure if, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if the Milton corridor plan also considers the future alignment of university and future development of Milltown, which is, of course, ADOT is in partnership with the city and Vintage Partners.
Dan, did you want to answer that?
Mr. Chair, is it okay if I respond?
Yeah, please do. Yes.
Thank you. And thank you very much for your comments and questions. Great comments. To start with your questions, we did consider all existing construction projects such as Milltown and University alignment in our analysis and modeling. And we've been coordinating with city representatives to obtain the latest plan designs for all ongoing projects as those updates are available to ensure we're including the latest and greatest. So ongoing coordination is there. Similarly, to address the other comment about climate action plan, we have included representatives from the city's sustainability office in our project partners group for review, and with comments from the partners in the public about environmental impacts. We did evaluate each of the alternatives to help us understand the air quality impacts of each of those alternatives. And so we will be documenting those results in our reports to assist with that effort.
Thank you, Dan. Do we have more comments, questions? Okay, while you're thinking, I had a couple comments. The pick up on what Council Member Salas was mentioning, university. When we make those changes to university to correct the alignment, and when Milltown goes in, and will ADOT be kind of helping coordinate, maybe putting in wider sidewalks, because they're probably going to be impacted anyway. And if they have to pour new sidewalks, will they put in wider sidewalks in that area? Or is that a city issue?
It's definitely both. We want to accommodate that, and that comment was raised in our last meeting. And so with the revised or most latest plan set, we'll make sure to include that recommendation, which I believe is an 8-foot sidewalk along the southbound portion of that corridor. But yes, we'll be coordinating very closely to make sure that we have consistency with the current projects, including Milltown and University alignment.
Okay, and then I might mention that there's a strong possibility that an underpass will be built near University as part of the Milltown project. I presume ADOT is aware of that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is listed as one of our assumed spot improvements.
So, and as far as framing, instead of calling it the no build whatever, it might be better to call it spot improvements. You know, that's a positive thing. Whereas Mr. Aslan pointed out, no build plus whatever you say after that, people are just going to focus on the 2 words no build. So I suggest some kind of improved framing, maybe spot improvements, maybe you have a better idea. I guess I had a question is, when we survey the public, I'm wondering if who that so-called public is. Is that just people that voluntarily responded? It might be like 90% property owners along that corridor, and they may have one opinion where the city and the county at large might have a completely different opinion. So can you kind of tell me like who was able to respond to the surveys? Was it the people that went to the events, or I'll let you answer that.
Yes, that's a great question. And what we did to address that was within our online surveys, we specifically asked those questions to the participants so that we could get a better understanding of the representation of the people responding. So we did ask if they were business owners, if they lived within a certain proximity to the corridor. We also asked questions related to low income to see if we were getting a representation from the underrepresented community members. So we did ask a series of those questions, and we should actually be getting those public involvement summary reports on the website here pretty soon. My consultant has prepared them. I just need to review them and with the partners and get them on the website. But we do have answers to all those details, and we'll be able to make that transparent to you shortly.
All right, so that and all the presentation you gave today is all on the website or will be very soon. Are you considering other pedestrian improvements across Milton?
Yes, those are all under review by the project partners. We started reviewing them in our last meeting and will continue to do so this month. We're hoping to reach a consensus on a balanced set of improvements that we could achieve throughout the corridor.
So, and then I have one last question. Assuming we do the spot improvements, no widening alternative, do you have any recommendations on what we do at the railroad bridge? I mean, are you envisioning, well, we might as well just keep it 4 lanes? Or no, we should make it 6 lanes because who knows, we might do something in the future.
It's a very complex and sensitive topic. I probably can't speak on behalf of ADOT of what the ultimate plan is there, but typically speaking, since there is obviously one day it will need to be reconstructed at one point, just from an engineering perspective. But also since the railroad company the BNSF has a desire to add that 3rd track, likely one day it's going to be rebuilt. And the typical response from ADOT under those situations is to try to accommodate a wide enough footprint for build out, because this is just a 20-year master plan, but those types of structures can last 50 to 100 years at times. And so we have to think of the long-term build out of that, which may be a wider footprint than what we're recommending from the master plan. And so our district staff, Audra Merrick, she'll be coordinating closely with the BNSF and the city as that initiative is progressed. And if Metro Plan moves forward with that more detailed analysis, I'm sure we'll participate in that as well.
All right, we're kind of running over time-wise, but I'll just, one last call. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Oh, Mr. Melbick, I think you wanted to make some closing comments, please.
I would, thank you, and I will be quick because we do have a couple of more substantial items still in our remaining 30 minutes. One, thank you again, Dan, and I am hearing, incredulity and some disappointment from board members. Is how could we, be in our 4th year of a problem we've had for 40 years and recommend no build? And I'm hearing board members say we're not really ready to accept this. And if we do accept it, we certainly need to present it, frame it differently. And then questions about the statistical validity of the input and the survey, which Dan and I and staff of other agencies talked about over the past couple of months. It does feel unsatisfactory. And I don't say that to point a finger at Dan. I recognize it's a tough spot because there are people saying, well, you have to do something. And then we look at what there's will to do, and it's like, we don't want you to do anything. And that's a really tough spot to be. Dan, especially when we end up slowing down traffic by doing any improvements. Dan has said, and I would position it the same way if I were Dan, that he's got the support of the project partners. I do want to bring this plan back and ask for Metro Plan to support it of the board. I'd like to be in a position where I can recommend that. What I've said to Dan is I want to do that. And it's really some contingencies on, for example, the underpass at Milton Road for pedestrians being included in the plan. Looking at some of the spot improvements that Dave is much more expert on than I am. Recognizing the underpass at Milton, also that Councilmember McCarthy just brought up that needs to be considered. And the other thing a couple things I just want to end with. Years ago, when we started the 5-year regional transportation plan process that led to Props 419 and 420, what I am on record as saying a couple of times, actually many times in public meetings and on the radio, is that the solution to Milton is to vow to never build another Milton. It's fundamentally broken. You've got 3 layers deep of retail on either side, and we're spilling an interstate into a 4-lane road. And at some point we look at, I say this somewhat sarcastically, but maybe we should change the name to Humpty Dumpty Road. Can it be fixed? And that's the conundrum we have and what Dan is struggling with. And the other thing I'm going to end, and this might be like I'm grasping for optimistic straws here. However, for the sustainability community, oftentimes what you hear is you can't build your way out of congestion. Stop building more roads, start moving to other modes because you can't, if you just put in 6 lanes, you'll just have more congestion and attract more traffic. So in some ways, and this needs more consideration, in some ways, that might actually be an argument for the recommendation that Dan is working towards as we look for other ways to move people by bikes and ped and transit and other corridors. And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
All right, and unless anyone has any follow-up, we'll move on to item G. Okay, so on item G, this is the Regional Transportation Advocacy Council, RTAC. Last month, Councilmember Salas volunteered to be our representative on that board, and she's attended meetings already. It would be good to have an alternate for that position. And so I'm wondering if there's any volunteers, but before I open it up for that, I also might say that it might be a good idea, since the representative is a city person, it might be good to have a county person there. And so we may want to talk to Supervisor Vasquez when he appears. So if there's any discussion on this or volunteers, please come forward now. If not, we could table this until next month. And Jeff, did you have any other comments besides what I just introduced?
Mr. Chairman, no, you've captured it well. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
Yeah, just please note that the RTAC chair is Supervisor Matt Ryan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so, but I recommend to hold off until we figure out or we establish the participation of Supervisor Vasquez, and we can also approach Supervisor Begay.
Right.
Of course, Mr. Peru's replacement as he transitions to his city manager, county manager position.
All right, and there's no emergency on this. So it kind of sounds like we have a consensus to table this at least till next month. I think that makes sense. All right, hearing no other comments, let us go on to item H, which is state legislative funding update. Mr. Malbec, I think you're going to take the lead on this, just a discussion item.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, yeah, we have 3 more items. Each one of them could take the remaining 24 minutes we have. They're interesting, and I'm going to go as quickly as I can. We do a state, and I want to recognize Kevin Adam is in the room. He is Executive Director of the Rural Transportation Advocacy Council. And we have a measurable objective this year to bring in at least $750,000 in additional revenues, a couple million over the next 5 years. We talked last month about how MetroPlan's limited in the amount of advocacy it can do. So we partner with the Rural Transportation Advocacy Council, who really is the advocacy wing. And of course, we stay involved in funding and policy because you can't plan and build projects unless you have money to do them, and you have to ask for money. So last month on February 3rd, we talked about the state budget surplus and how we might be able to pursue some of that funding for our region. And at that meeting, the board asked, and Councilmember Salas volunteered, actually, to send a letter to Senator Rogers and ask for funding. And I've attached a copy of that letter in your packet. It's $5 million for the 4th Street corridor. And that letter went out, and we're actually waiting to hear. Haven't had any word back on it yet. Additionally, we have the opportunity to all work together. So there are 10 rural and small urban councils of government in Arizona. MetroPlan is just one representing our area. So we've had discussions with Kevin, RTAC, and the other members about how we might work together. And I'm really enthusiastic about the discussions we've had, tentatively looking at a $30 million request, and that's divided per capita. Some people on the team, other directors of my peers, are working with Kevin to figure out how much money would come to each area. And then RTAC every year, not just a one-shot deal, but every year would go back with this list and say, we're all in this together and we'd like $30 million and here's how it will be spent. And then it's up to every area. So for us, MetroPlan, to say, oh, if we're going to get $2 million, here's how we're going to spend that money. And we prioritize and we make the case. And it puts us in a position to all go at this together. And to me, it really feels like the right solution. Plus, we can still make our individual requests. There's nothing prohibiting that. So a couple other points I want to make on this quickly. One, state funding has the benefit of being local money, so it doesn't trigger some of the requirements that come with federal money. And also, there are really ongoing policy and legislative initiatives such as indexing the gas tax, increasing the gas tax, establishing parity with gasoline-powered vehicles. RTAC continues to pursue these. MetroPlan has supported these for years and continues to support them. And I wanted to let you know about that. And just with I don't have alternatives to provide because I'm not asking for action. I'm just trying to keep you updated. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I know I'm going fast, but I wonder if there are questions or comments from the board.
Do we have any questions? Thank you, Jeff. We are running a little tight on time. So why don't we move on to the regional transportation plan? And I think, Jeff, you were going to make some comments about that.
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. The regional transportation plan is one of our big projects. Every 5 years, we update it to be a 25-year plan. And this year, we put together an advisory group. That group met on January 27th and on February 24th. And we discussed this group in some detail last month. I heard a lot of support from the board members of who was served on this advisory group and kind of the powerhouse and diverse group that they are. And our meetings have gone well. And I just want to share with you, if I can boil down what's going to be a 500-page document and 20-year view, just share with you really, I think, what is the essence of what we're asking this plan to do. One, the first scenario is we're going to ask the planners, and we're going to put together a 25-year plan that looks at building out what has already been approved. For example, when we did this plan 5 years ago, it led to propositions 419 and 420. And this plan provided momentum to go to the voters and say, do you want these projects to be completed? And the voters said yes. And now that we have that mandate from the people, we need to build those things out, and there are many years to do. And then we need to take it a little bit farther and say, if we build out this design, what comes next, 15, 20 years down the road, or what else might we need to make it whole? And we really continue on this particular path. And I would say maybe in any other year, that might be the entire plan. That would be the purpose of it. However, this year, given, and what I've heard some board members already say, there's much greater interest in sustainability and in the climate emergency. And the regional transportation plan has an opportunity to open up those questions. And I'm going fast, so I'm going to back up for a minute because there's an important point on the first scenario. The first scenario can also consider changes over the past few years. So for example, although we have funding approved in Prop 419 and 420, and if things have shifted and the community wants there to be greater emphasis on bike lanes and transit and pedestrian lanes, there's certainly some fine tuning that can be done. But what I'll say is that fine tuning is somewhat limited because voters have approved really legal language for projects to be completed. So we can fine tune, but it's still pretty much the current land use plan. The reason I put scenario 2 out here, the enhanced sustainability scenario, is it looks at really the big picture and saying, what if we wanted to do things differently? And this is a fiscally unconstrained plan. In other words, we're not saying, how do we take the money and spend it differently? We're saying, what do we need to make it work to really run things differently and dare to be creative and visionary and get some ideas down on paper? Now, this second scenario is not going to be any kind of policy mandate to any of the communities. It's going to capture ideas and give a starting point that if the city or the county or NAU or ADOT want to follow up, they can. So we'll just begin the visioning work. And that's why we have an advisory group that is as diverse as we have, because we want to have this dialogue at that level before we bring a plan forward. So we're in the process of getting our request for proposals on the street. The dates are actually still pending. We're fine tuning it to get it out there. And really it's administrative and legal language to make sure we do everything we need to from a procurement perspective. And other than that, I would say that I've got support from the TAC and the management committee on this approach. They really didn't discuss it in great detail. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I turn it back to you.
Well, thank you. Jeff, does anyone have any comments in particular about including the enhanced sustainability scenario? Comments, please? Well, I, for one, think that it's good to include that as an option that we can at least help us think it through in the future. I'm not seeing any other comments, so I guess we'll move on to federal funding, which is item J. Thank you for that, Jeff.
Thank you. I'm actually going to put a PowerPoint presentation up after I just do a brief overview. We generally do a federal funding update, and last month it was Director Peru who asked to give more information on what's happening at the federal level, and a lot is happening. A lot has happened in the past few days, frankly. So I have a PowerPoint presentation to share, and some of the main highlights relate to competitive grants that are open and the possibility, the seeming likelihood that congressional earmarks will return. So I'm going to close that and go to my PowerPoint presentation and walk you through this. Okay, for the federal funding update for today, a few items here I want to hit: leadership, legislation, what's happening with congressional earmarks, an update on competitive grants, and then MetroPlan's role. And in terms of leadership, Pete Buttigieg is the Secretary of Transportation, former mayor of South Bend, Indiana. And I got to tell you, I wasn't sure how to pronounce his name, so I went on Google, and there are video after video of people trying to figure out how to pronounce his name and mispronouncing it. So he says it's Buttigieg. So in any case, he's the new Secretary of Transportation. And in years past, some of you might recall that Arizona has had great representation in this position. Victor Mendez, who was the former ADOT director, Mary Peters, who was the former ADOT director, had been Secretary of Transportation. It's given us a great in to that office. Representative Peter DeFazio is chair of the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. So he's from Oregon. I put Representative Greg Stanton here, even though he's not really in a leadership position, but he is on the committee and he's from the state of Arizona, former mayor of Phoenix. And then Senator Leahy from Vermont is chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. So lots of people and groups involved in making funding decisions, and these are some of the key players. In terms of legislation, so quick reminder, in December of 2020, COVID relief funding was passed. It was about $900 billion total. 181 million of that came to ADOT for infrastructure. And in your last staff report, there's an attachment that shows how that funding is intended to be spent. Actually, none of it is coming to the Flagstaff area, but about 4 million is going into Coconino County. So that's one bill that was passed. What's pending right now is COVID relief funding. And just on Saturday, the House passed a $1.9 billion package. It's unknown how it's going to advance in the Senate. I know some add-ons of people have said will absolutely be removed. I think like minimum wage change is one of them that there's strong pushback from in the Senate. And it's going to have to go back to the House for reconsideration before it moves forward. And then we have a 6-year funding bill, surface transportation reauthorization. So every 6 years, this legislation is renewed. And the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee just began their work just this past week. So the House is likely to begin their work next week, and they're updating what they did last year. So last year, the House put together a draft of this bill that was about 1.5 trillion. And it needs to be passed by September 30th of 2021, because that's when the current funding expires, the current bill expires. So it could come together this summer. It's also certainly possible, it's happened many times in the past, that a continuing resolution is advanced and it just keeps us moving without an overhaul of new legislation. And then another big item is just there is pending Build Back Better initiative. And Build Back Better, a $2 trillion infrastructure plan, was part of the Biden platform. And there is bipartisan support for infrastructure spending. And that may be where the agreement ends, because discussion continues on the price tag, a lot of discussion on how it's paid for, and then some of the add-ons. And there are things like changes to the Affordable Care Act and, again, minimum wage that are being thrown into this. And it's just hard to know how that's all going to get sorted out. I'm putting down a speculation here that the impending deadline for reauthorization, it really could lead to a delay of a separate infrastructure bill. The focus might move to reauthorization. And that's okay. And I'm going to move ahead here to the next couple of slides, and I need to get to earmarks because that's very timely for us. In terms of competitive grants, a big one opened, 889 million is available for highway and freight projects of national and regional significance. It's called Infrastructure for Rebuilding America. It's the Infra grant. It closes in just a couple of weeks. I don't believe anyone in our community is pursuing this grant. We've talked about it with our member agencies. No one is in the pipeline for this funding at this time. And then we also have a build grant that we've talked about for years, and city in particular has pursued build funding for the past 5 years. We haven't been successful yet for road, rail, transit, and port projects. And this should be opened again in late April. The big development that's very new is community project funding, also known as earmarks. So earmarks is where Congress specifies how funds are spent. And this used to happen a lot, but the earmarks were eliminated about 10 years ago. And funding decisions were basically moved to the executive branch. So the grants like build and infra were all done competitively by agencies rather than doing earmarks. So earmarks indicate a return to former practices. And there's some reasons why we do it. There's a lot of Republicans and Democrats, both sides of the aisle think that it makes legislating easier. It shifts power back to appropriators. They feel, Congress has been left out. And I like this quote from Senator Leahy. I've always believed that members of Congress have a better understanding of their communities than Washington bureaucrats. And he talks about how they are in good faith negotiations in the House and Senate about how they can bring earmarks back with reforms for transparency and accountability. And I just put a clip here of a document that is being worked up now that will make earmarks more transparent in the future. So some thoughts for discussion. Earmarks may be part of any pending legislation. It seems to me COVID relief, reauthorization, Build Back Better, any of them could have earmarks attached. Preparing and messaging is critical. When I did this with success years ago for another organization, I had a one-page glossy and would walk to the halls of Congress with elected officials, and we just make our case simply, clearly, and it works. Also, each member agency can make their own independent requests. And an item for discussion, and we've got such limited time here, I guess I'll just jump to say that at the strategic advance that we're doing next month, it's a great opportunity to talk about a joint request for all member agencies. So clear, collaborative messaging on a project or two that benefit all of the member agencies. And arguably that simplifies the process for our congressional delegation, because we can all go together and ask for the same thing. They don't have to pick and choose winners and losers. So if at the advance we can start to identify what those projects are, it would be very helpful. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Jeff. Does anyone have any questions? All right, let us move on to Northern Arizona Manufacturing Partnership Report. Mr. Wessel, I believe you're going to take this one.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair,
Excuse me, Mr.
members of the
Chair,
board.
can I interrupt you? I'm sorry, real quick.
Yeah,
I've
Steve,
got,
go
I've got a
ahead.
hard stop in about 2 minutes. And so I do need to bow out, but I do need to sign off officially. Because as you may know, this would be my last meeting today since I'll be at transitioning to county. So I just want to very
It's sort of
quickly.
like I told the Mountain Line Board when I left. It's like, I'm not going very far and you're
I
not.
know, I'm going to the other side of the downtown area, but I apologize. I am transitioning to Coconino County on April 5th. And so my seat on of course, the Mountain Line Board is changing as well. We just recently gone through officer elections. And so we'll be having a conversation on the Mountain Line Board to identify the member rep for the for Metro Plan. But again, I do want, I'm not going too far. The county has several reps on Metro Plan's board and we'll continue to be connected, but I do appreciate the experience, the short experience. I apologize in being on the Metro Plan board. So again, I appreciate
Well,
your.
we look forward to working with you.
Yep.
Thank
Will
you.
do. All right. Take
Thank
care.
you,
everybody.
Steve.
All right. See you later.
Best of luck in your new role.
Thanks so much. Appreciate
All
it.
right.
Take care,
Congratulations.
everybody. Bye-bye.
See you soon.
All right, Dave, we'll give it back to you.
Yes, very quickly, Mr. Chair, members of the board. This is a request from Member Salas asking for an update on our agreement with the Northern Arizona Manufacturing Partnership. So very quickly, history back in late 2000s, we did, early 2000s, we did a freight study. That freight study recommended an intermodal yard at Belmont and Camp Navajo. And part of the strategy was the formation of a freight advisory board. We were moving forward with a federal enhanced use lease program out there. The recession hit, things fell apart. And then in 2014, with Econa, we revisited freight patterns to see if things had recovered, and they had. And so we approached the chamber to see if their Northern Arizona Manufacturing Partnership would serve as a freight advisory board, with the idea that we start generating some interest from local shippers. Unfortunately, I was not able to generate that interest. I was looking at calling, to look at testing the advantages of collectivizing freight as opposed to everybody shipping individually. Was not able to recruit. I was looking for just 3 or 4 shippers to kind of band together and just seek a quote. I was not able to do that. And then things like the regional transportation plan process came into onto the schedule, and then the transportation tax campaign of 2018. So I was just never able to really follow through with that. As far as I know, the MOU is still in place. I have not heard of activities by NAMP recently. I'm not sure what those stand, but that's my report.
Thank you, David. Any questions for David? All right, seeing none, I guess we'll go on to item L. And of course, we have a 3-hour April 7th meeting coming up. Jeff, did you have any other comments?
I don't. I just want to recognize, as you know, that Geronimo Vasquez is going to be joining us and as a board member next month. And we do not yet know who's going to replace Steve Peru representing the NAPTA board. So more changes to come.
Yeah, the only thing that stays the same is more change. So I'll go around. Does anyone on the board have anything that they would like to bring up, or future agenda items, or just comments in general before we adjourn? We're actually pretty close to being on schedule here.
Yeah.
Regina, did you have something, or?
Yes,
Please go
Mr. Chair,
ahead.
Mr. Chair, if I may. we're wearing my Economic Collaborative of Northern Arizona board hat representing the city. I attended the Econa Advisory Board meeting last week, and we had Senator Mark Kelly as the guest speaker, and he amplified on his top priorities. And the first thing he mentioned was transportation infrastructure and economic development, tourism, workforce development, military veterans affairs, broadband infrastructure, as well as forest restoration. So just want to share that information. Oh, and I will also have the opportunity to meet with Senator Rogers in a couple of weeks, and I will shamelessly remind her about the letter that we sent, that I signed a few weeks ago, asking for her to request a direct appropriation to help us build and expand Butler to 4th Street.
Right. Take her 3 copies.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else have any closing comments?
Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Thompson.
I'm very happy that finally the earmarks on B coming back. That's one funding that a lot of these rural communities look to and depend on improving many of the roads that can't be funded any other way. So we gotta depend on this in order to increase businesses up in the rural remote area. So again, I'm very happy that the information is here, for us to begin thinking about. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesse. Any other comments? Well, if not, going, sold. I think we could adjourn this meeting. So I hereby adjourn the meeting. I think we're 2 minutes over. That's not too bad. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jeff.